And here we are. Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 130th episode. I know, 130. The 130th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on a mighty blaze. I am your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. If you're new to a mighty blaze, welcome. We're a group of volunteer creatives who have been hosting online literary events for the past 3 years to help support books, authors, and the wider publishing community. Here on Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host Joe Moldover and I bring you conversations between authors and their favorite indie booksellers to shine a light on storytelling, creativity, and the small businesses that enrich our communities. If you're a regular viewer of the show, thank you. You may remember that we've set a goal for ourselves to spotlight a bookstore in every U.S. state, as well as Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And today, that goal has happily brought us to the beautiful state of Hawaii. And I have two wonderful guests with me, and I'm looking forward to welcoming them and introducing them to you. So first, let me introduce you to our author, Kristiana Kahakauwila, and our bookseller, David DeLuca. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
And
Aloha.
Aloha. Yes. Let me tell you a little bit about Kristiana and David. So Kristiana is a hapa writer of Kanaka Maoli.
Kanaka Maoli.
Kanaka Maoli. Thank you so much for your generosity with my stumbling tongue. Of Native Hawaiian, German, and Norwegian descent. Her first book, This is Paradise, was a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. It's terrific. I want you all to read it. Kristiana has published short fiction and essays in a number of journals. She's also been a magazine writer and editor. She's the recipient of numerous fellowships and awards, including fellowships to Breadloaf and Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Study. Today, she teaches in the English department at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Sorry, Kristiana. Manoa. And thank you so much. And in the Low Residency MFA at the Institute of American Indian Arts. David DeLuca is the co-owner of DeShop Books and Curiosities, a local independent bookstore and event space in Honolulu. He is also the director of publishing and chief operation officer of Best Press, which is based in Honolulu, and it's a publishing company developing academic and popular interest books and media. He also serves on the board of Hawaii Public Radio and is the former chair of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. Whoosh. Welcome to you both. We're very happy you're here. Now to our audience. Oh, my pleasure. To our audience, if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Please post them below the broadcast in the comments, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. So, Kristiana, first question. When we invited you to be on the show, first thing you said was DeShop. That's the store I want to talk to you. Tell us about your connection to the store, what makes it so special, why you wanted to be in conversation with David today.
Well, I first started going to DeShop when everything was in lockdown. So I wasn't actually physically going there. I was going to their website and also calling into the store. And it was just such a lovely experience working and ordering books from the folks who work there. And they made these like gorgeous packages for some friends in New York for Christmas. 2020. So it was just like so nice. And then when finally we could be going places in person, like my ideal afternoon is getting a green tea at the Daily Whisk, which is just around the corner, and then going and buying a book. So it's like my sweet little experience for myself. I have a toddler at home, so there aren't many sweet little experiences just for myself. So yeah, I just have a ton of affection for DeShop. I love how everything is curated. And in addition to like the fabulous, novels and short story collections and books about Hawaii, they have a great section for kids.
It's always wonderful to hear someone talk about your bookstore, I'm sure, David.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely little description. I mean, that's really great to know. And those nicely designed packages that were put together during COVID, I mean, that was all of the staff and the team that's really sort of come together to really make the shop sort of a true neighborhood bookstore. We really try to be a reflection of the community and the customers that we exist for. And I think that, um, it's flattering for us to have someone like Kristiana, who is a writer based in Hawaii and has produced works and is producing more works, not with a local publisher, but um, being based there, it's really, the success that someone has in that regard is a success for everybody that's sort of involved in the industry. And publishing really is that soup to nuts industry, right? It's authors, it, it's the editing team, it's illustrators if that's involved with it, publishers, booksellers. I mean, it's everything. It's really sort of a full circle industry, and none of it really exists without the other. So I mean, hearing you say that really, it's a special comment that resonates with me, and I'm sure with the rest of the shop staff too, because it those are the things that validate what we do, right? So I mean, that's why you go into business as a bookstore.
How did the bookstore come to be? And were you founded in, am I right, in 2018? Was that when you opened?
Yeah, so the bookstore was really, and we had the fortune of having space in our. We're a little bit of a unique operation as a book publisher and as an independent book publisher, where we have our publishing offices, and then we have a 10,000 square foot warehouse where we handle all of our own distribution, and then distribution for other publishers who are producing works about Hawaii or on topics related to Hawaii. And so the front facing street level side of our warehouse uh, became free for us as we were reorganizing and renovating some space. And after a lot of travel and a lot of thought and a lot of discussion with folks from around Hawaii, and the awareness in there being a lack of independent bookstores, we really sort of focused our attention on trying to create something that could be a resource. And as a publisher, so much of our time is spent talking story with folks about things that they're interested in and things they'd like to see books on. And so it was so much of us going out into community, and the shop was really instigated by this opportunity to have community come in, right? I mean, reading can be such a personal experience, and it's great when people can get together around shared ideas or shared voices or shared interests. And the shop was really, again, it was a fortunate opportunity for us to create a space that could be an invitation for community to come in and share in, the industry that we've been in as a publishing company for almost 44 years. And that was really it. I mean, there's not like Kristiana talks about having there's not a blueprint for, how to raise a kid, right? There's not really a blueprint for how to run a successful bookstore. You just kind of go after a passion, and you hope that it can eventually toddle on its own and start walking and get to the point where it's dressing itself and doing all these other things on its own. So, yeah, I mean, that was it. It was very community focused, and it was meant to be a reflection of the industry that we're in as publishers, and then also celebrating the interest of the community of Hawaii and celebrating local literature on the same level as international and nationally recognized literature.
The audience that comes into your bookstore, what's the mix between people who live in your neighborhood, in your community, versus tourists? Do you see that you get, because you're not, I Google mapped your store and look like you're not like on Waikiki, right? So you're not in like the heart of tourist central.
No, we're not. We like that.
Yeah.
Not that the tourists aren't a bad thing, but again, I mean, we're a local book publishing company, and opening up a bookstore was focused on locals first, right? That's really what our goal was. We in some of the early in 2019, the first year that we were open, we had a really cool write-up in the New York Times travel section, like 36 hours in Honolulu, and we were one of the businesses they mentioned dropping in and seeing, and it resonated. Like we saw people who came in and sought us out because of the fact that they read about that in the New York Times. And that's again, that's great. That's flattering, and we really appreciate that. And in some ways, that's kind of like speaking to the true believers and the core audience. Because is we were chatting a little bit earlier. When people like us are traveling, like we're seeking out bookstores, right? And you want to see it because bookstores are they really are like a real great entry point into the identity of a place, of a local place. And for us, it's we're still unfamiliar to locals, right? I mean, Hawaii's not super big when it comes to population, and certainly local population compared to tourists that come in and the numbers that come into Hawaii. So we're still seeing, fortunately, we're still seeing like a good balance of new versus returning folks that are coming in, and so tourists are probably actually the smallest percentage of that.
Okay.
And um for us, I guess that's a good thing.
Well, it's a
It's
tourists
not
are
bad.
unpredictable. I mean, there's an unpredictability, right? Look at the lockdown of COVID, right? If you're solely dependent on the tourists coming to your community, then
Yeah,
that's sustainable.
so I mean, when we do have folks that come in that are not from, not local, or they're not from another island in Hawaii, it's authors like Kristiana's work that those are the books that we're pushing on people to become familiar with, right? Like they come in, and the majority of tourists or visitors that do come into the shop, their requests for reads are really local
Yeah.
subjects, or like locally written books, which is great. I mean, I mean, Christiana's work is a perfect, uh, you know, she can speak to it obviously better than I can, but in a lot of ways, it's a great metaphor for real Hawaii. I mean, Hawaii is a very diverse and culturally vibrant place that has a lot of unique values and is sometimes goes through a complex identity. Like, and so that's real Hawaii, right? Like it's not beaches and cocktails. There's a whole real component to it. And so when we do have people come in and visit, that's the kind of stuff that we push to have them read, to get familiar with what the reality of Hawaii is, or get a better understanding of Hawaii.
That's an excellent segue into my next question. Thank you for setting me up so nicely. I appreciate that. Maybe you sell books for a living or something. Kristiana, I mean, I know this book came out a little while ago. So I'm sure you've heard all the wonderful things about the book, but I imagine it doesn't hurt to hear some more again. And I really loved it. I really enjoyed so much spending the time in your words. And I know that I'm not the only one, so I just want to share a sampling of some of the great reviews. Kirkus called this a finely wrought work from an impressive new talent. Elle magazine called it a sparkling debut story collection. Bookpage probably had my favorite, with prose like a riptide. I love that. This is Paradise is the perfect way to mentally transport you to Hawaii. Oprah magazine called it gritty, haunting, and suspenseful. And no one else but Joyce Carol Oates herself. Vividly imagined, beautifully written, and at times almost unbearably suspenseful. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So wonderful. Tell us a little bit about this book. And for those people who haven't yet read it, but will go buy it from the shop immediately, link below. I'm specifically interested in, I want to hear like your description of it, but also I'd love for you to talk about the question you were trying to answer. Because I always think that authors are trying to answer a question when they write fiction. And then I saw you give a talk in which you said that same thing. You said, all of my writing circles around questions. I don't write because I know something. I write because I'm really trying to understand it, and especially understand it personally and emotionally, as well as intellectually.
Kimberly, you and I are on the same page then.
Like, when I heard that, I like rewound it. Like, wait, that's what I always say. So tell us about your beautiful collection. What inspired it? What was the question?
Yeah, so this is Paradise is a collection of short stories, and there are 6 of them. They're sort of longish short stories. I'm like a short story writer who's like chasing the feel of the novel. And there's sort of, it's not exact, but there are stories set on most of the inhabited islands. And yeah, I think I grew up, I'm Kanaka Maoli, I'm Native Hawaiian. My dad grew up and is from Maui. That's where most of our family still is. But I grew up in Southern California. And so because my dad worked for an airliner, we were able to fly back a lot and be with the family a ton, which I'm, feel so grateful for. And yet I didn't grow up in Hawaii. And so I always had this sense of kind of both belonging and not. And this sense that when I was in California, it's like I was looking toward Hawaii. And when I've now as an adult, I also live in Hawaii. But the times I've been in Hawaii, kind of looking to California and feeling like, where do I quite belong? And I don't think that's an unusual feeling. I think a lot of us have this sense of like, is over there where I more belong? So again, I think this is like a sensation a lot of people experience in different ways, but that was sort of the like kernel that was feeding a lot of the tensions and storylines and character dynamics of This is Paradise. And while each story has its own maybe question that drives it, yeah, the collection as a whole is really, asking, and David brought it up, Hawaii is a really complex place with a complex history of colonization and missionization, with plantations, with numerous immigration groups, and with indigenous people and indigenous land. So that's kind of there at the edges, even though all the stories are set in sort of the contemporary world. So yeah, this kind of central question, I think, of the whole book is about belonging and different ideas of how we understand that belonging.
Do you remember which story you wrote first?
Yes, the story I wrote first was 39 Rules.
Wow.
Yeah, for making a Hawaiian funeral into a drinking game. And the book actually was recently translated into French.
Yes, it was.
And that's the story they used as the title. So it's I got to think the French is 39 39 bonnes raisons de transformer des obsèques hawaïennes en beuverie. It's quite a title, but the French are like behind it. They're like, oh, that's funny, we're in. So yeah, that was the first story I wrote, and it came out of kind of this real kernel, this kind of moment after my grandmother had passed away, and she was the matriarch of our family. And I just moved back to Hawaii as an adult on my own terms, and as again understanding belonging and a sense of place within our family, in this moment that our family was changing. So while the story is totally fictional, again, there's that real kernel at its heart. And I think people feel that when they're reading the stories, like the kind of truthful question or truthful kernel.
Absolutely. I think when you're reading this book, even if you are not Hawaiian, your story is here on the pages because loss and that sense of belonging, as you mentioned, they're universal themes and questions that we all search for.
One of the sweetest messages I ever got was from someone who lived in the South, and they were talking about how even though they lived in the South, that story was the one that felt like how their family did funerals. And it was just like, oh, we could not be like geographically farther, but there's something we're really understanding about each other. And it was such a thoughtful note from a reader.
Well, that is the power of storytelling, isn't it? That we find ourselves on the page.
Completely. Yeah.
Even if the story takes place and far away from where you are. I was thinking about how I can't choose a favorite of your stories in this collection, and that I love something in every single one of them. And I think, my favorite element in the This is Paradise, which is the first story in the collection, are how you have these choruses of women speaking. So I don't want to describe the story because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there are groups of women, and they speak as one, or they sort of experience the story as one, and yet they all felt they didn't feel, they felt distinct from one another, and from, you know, they felt like I could understand them and connect with them. And I love that story, that element of that story. Well, I could sit here actually all day and tell you all the things I liked.
Well, thank you. And I was going to dive in because
Yeah.
so that story is written in the first person plural, so it uses the we, and it's true. It's these kind of different we's, these three different groups of women. But I've always been like really fascinated by point of view and perspective. And one of the people I turned to was Julie Otsuka, who wrote The Buddha in the Attic, and that's all from a we. And then her new book out, The Swimmers, which is seen in the shop. I can tell you which like table it's on. But that has, you know, quite a bit of first person plural. So anyway, I thought I'd toss that out there as long as we're kind of talking bookish writerly things.
Oh, that's great.
He was such a great writer.
And we'll put a link to The Swimmers below so people can check that out as well. I was wondering, what is your relationship to these stories now? They came out a few years ago. I know that I read this book a couple of months ago, right around the time I invited you to be on the show. And then I put it down, and then I reread it in anticipation for today, or in preparation for today. And I found in those months in between that your stories would come to me. Sort of when I was walking the dog or brushing my teeth, I would think about scenes and characters. And it felt like I was connected to them. And I wonder, as the writer, what is your relationship? Is it like an ex-boyfriend you never want to hear from again, or or are you still in dialogue with them, or do you still think about these characters? What is your relation? I'm always curious about that. Like, after an author writes and publishes a book, what's your relationship to it? Is it still alive for you? And can you talk a little bit about
Oh my gosh, I love that question. And now I want to know how every other author has answered it, because I'm sure it's so different. I feel so much affection. Maybe this book is an ex I do want to keep hanging out with, just as friends. But yeah, I still feel close to the book. I feel close to the characters. I feel fortunate that I go back to the book and it still feels truthful to me. That, again, like the kind of level of honesty I brought to writing it is still, yeah, I think I still agree with myself. It was published in 2013. It's almost 10 years old. So I would expect to not maybe agree with myself anymore, but I'm glad I do. And at the same time, like I've been working on 2 other books. There was a foray into script writing. So it's like I've also been looking at other projects that maybe take up a little more brain space for me than, this book does right now.
I like that it still feels truthful. That's a great explanation. Thank you. David, I wanted to ask you about the publishing arm of what you do. So I understand that Best Press has been in operation since 1979, and that a significant portion of what you focus on is Hawaii and Oceania and titles related to the region. Can you talk a little bit about the independent press? And I'm just so curious what it's like to run a publishing company in Hawaii. I mean, you're so far away from mainland USA. How does that factor into the logistics of what you do? I kept thinking about shipping. Like, if you're running a bookstore in Hawaii, how long does it take to get a book from New York City? Like, I was so curious about, because I imagine the logistics of what you do is a big part of running any sort of business on an island.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the geographic location makes logistics a little bit of harder game to play than if you're going from New York to Ohio. And interestingly, within the publishing industry, so much of the books that are in existence, they're all more or less like stored kind of in the East Coast. A lot of them in Pennsylvania, New Jersey too, right? So there's these massive warehouses where there's books, and you put an order in with a publisher, or a bookstore puts an order in with a publisher or distributor, and a lot of them are coming from the same place. We we started in 1979. and the owners and founders of Best Press were very politically and culturally active in elements of the Hawaiian Renaissance and advocacy for Native and Indigenous voice, and approaching and telling histories of place and histories of people from a point of authenticity, and really trying to approach it from a degree where the correct mindset can be taken to tell that history to younger audiences, particularly in the case of the founding of Best Press, where as a result of the 1978 constitutional referendum and the state legislature deciding to make the teaching of Hawaiian studies mandatory in elementary school and in high school. And that was a driving force behind our origination, because at that time, none of that existed for that kind of an audience. A lot of the stuff that was out there was very scholarly, or it was written for an older audience. And so they had the mindset and the foresight to really go and try to take that content and material and adapt it so that it could be approached by younger audiences. And that was really sort of the origination that we had. And as we grew, so did the local publishing scene. I mean, Hawaii had a very strong publishing scene. It still has a strong publishing scene, which is a little bit more focused and very niche now than it was before. But Hawaii was much of a representation for what the majority of book publishing is internationally, where 80% of the worldwide industry is small to medium-sized independent presses that are focused on the regions and the places of where they're located, and producing works by the people who live there. And the majority of that work is, it's about those places. And so for us, I think that as we've grown, as audiences have grown, as people have become more connected on global threads, what's happened is that we've seen our ability to meet up with those people become much easier. And the outlets for doing that are much more accessible now, right? Our approach has always been that as an independent book publisher, it's not really enough anymore. And maybe this is because of our logistical limitations and being an island-based publisher. It's not just enough anymore to exclusively just publish one type of book, right? We've always been at our heart and at our foundation, and still to this day, an educational book publisher for early childhood through high school. But that's grown to be encompassing of general interest for picture books, biographies, memoirs about the people, the places, the stories of Hawaii and Oceania, and to work with other publishers who are producing great works, but not based in Hawaii, but are working again with authors like Kristiana who are writing and creating stories about this place and subjects that relate to the communities that we represent as a local publisher. We're working with those publishers to make those titles more readily available and widely available to local audiences because of those logistical limitations. And what we've seen, and I think what's come out over the last handful of years in particular, is that the subject matter in the book that Kristiana is writing about. I mean, these are human themes, right? These are not, at their core, they're not uncommon experiences, and they're those human to human connections that we all sort of feed off of, and they drive us. And a big focus on that is how they're looked at through the cultural lens or the communal lens from which they take place. And so talking about the French edition or translation of her book, I think that title is so befitting for that kind of an audience, because the whole sociological approach to that subject matter or that theme or that concept, it's happening through a different way, but at its core, it's a human concept, right? You're dealing with matriarchy, you're dealing with death, you're dealing with everything that goes through that process. And so in a way, I think that Hawaii and what we're both representative, author, publisher, the bookstore that we both survive off of, making our collective works available to audiences. We're becoming much more accessible, and we're becoming much more noticed, and we're becoming much more, I think, pursued in a way that that content wasn't done beforehand. Um, and whatever might be the causes for that, it could be a variety of things, but I think that people are really interested in seeing those commonalities that sort of tie us all together being told through those different lenses.
So we put a link below to the press, and I encourage people to go check it out. You have a wonderful selection of books that you don't have to be an educator to purchase, right? You can, if you're interested in learning more about the Hawaiian language, Hawaiian culture, and a whole bunch of other topics, please go follow the link below. I'm curious, David, what it's like producing these books that are focused on Hawaii, written by Hawaiian authors. What is the sort of widespread audience outside of Hawaii? Do you find that you have interested parties? I know you've been doing some work in Europe to spread the word. Do you find, I mean, I would say obviously there are, if Kristiana's book is a hit in France, like there are audiences around the world, but I'm curious about the work that you do. Do you find receptivity in other spots around the world?
Yeah, we do, and I think it's growing. I think that we're finding a lot of resonance with people in the communities outside of Hawaii and other parts of the world is really coming down to this sort of return to old world wisdom and indigenous wisdom, these ways that people have lived and practiced for so many years that are very in tune with the natural environment, and the natural environment drives that existence. And I think that that's a real big level of interest across the board, not in a particular field of study, like marine biology or something that's very specific to the physical and natural environment of Hawaii, for which there's programs and universities dedicated towards. But there's things that are very, very typical of Hawaiian values that you see as something that's of great and strong interest to people in other parts of the world, as we're going through this whole conversation of how do we be better caretakers of this planet that we are absolutely dependent on surviving off of, right? And so those stories in the representation of what Hawaii is, and the representation of who we are, not just for Hawaii, but for a publisher who produces content on Micronesia and parts of Southern Polynesia, it's really this idea and this representation of connecting old with new. New in the sense that folks within our region of the world are some of the first individuals that are visibly seeing climate change impact their lives, right, and where they live. And so I think that as authors like Kristiana have books that come out in like Kristiana's books in French because there's an audience for it, like there's an interest for it. It's not like some publisher wasn't on holiday in Hawaii was like, this is damn good. You know what? I'm just gonna make it into French and see what happens.
I'm sure that does happen, though. I'm sure that does happen.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's not happening like with us, because in some cases we're just bootstrapping projects together, and publishing, like publishing in the publishing is in very much it's a terrible business to be in, because it's like this balance of art meeting commerce, and every time you make a book you're literally rolling the dice. You don't know how it's going to resonate. Like, you can have the data and it can drive things towards what the genre is that you can produce, because there's an interest in this genre and it's high. Easiest one, children's books. People aren't going to stop making babies and kids, right? So there's always going to be an audience for children's books, but there's so many things that have to come together to make it successful and make it resonate. And so as a publisher, we'll produce something that we think is going to be an absolute hit, and it doesn't. It fizzles out, and you go back to the drawing board and have to figure out, well, why didn't that work, right? Or you're constantly revisiting works too. How do I make it better? Was there something we can do? So I really think that, you know, a lot of it is we see an aging population take place in the US in particular and in other parts of the world, Western world. We're seeing an audience change, right? And the audience change and younger audiences are looking for more authentic stories and more authenticated experiences. And I think that Hawaii writers and the topics coming out of Hawaii are an ideal fit for that because that's truly what it is.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Kristiana, we have an audience question for you. How do you think about the sequencing short stories in a collection? So we talked about how you have 6 stories. How did you decide the order in which they went and that process? Was that your decision? Was that your publisher's? How did that come to be?
Yes, it was. I remember I was on the airplane. I was flying back to visit my parents in California. So I had a 6-hour flight and I put down my little, tray table and I looked at each of the stories and I wrote down maybe just a couple like short, important things about them, what point of view they were in, because I play with point of view a lot. Is the narrator or the main character male or female? Is this a story primarily about family or primarily about relationships? I realized I had to write down what animal is in this story because like birds and dogs and animals were like popping up and I didn't even know it when I was writing it. And then I thought about like how do you vary these things as well as like what's the overall energy happening in each of these stories. So I wanted to give the reader like a different experience, maybe not all the wacky points of view right up front. And that helped me get like the first order down. But then I realized there was like this secondary thing or theme I hadn't noticed. And that was how thick the pigeon was in each of the stories. So that first story, This is Paradise, it takes place in Waikiki. It probably has like the lightest pigeon. And the pigeon gets thicker as you go through the book until you're on Big Island, up in Paniolo in cowboy country. And that's like such a thick and unique pigeon that even my dad, was like, oh, you got to ask one of your uncles about this. Even I can't help you with this. He speaks pigeon, he grew up speaking pigeon. So that ended up being like this thing that surprised me in the sequencing that made a big difference because that's also about bringing the reader into this world. And a reader who knows the place is like kind of like, oh, this is so fun. Oh yeah, I know. And the one who's new is like, oh, I picked up that language from the previous story, or I know a few of these words from context from the previous story. So now I'm like kind of brought along. And then there's also this like element of, again, belonging is a theme. And so where we're going in that final story about the relationship to Hawaii in place, kind of, that was the right final beat, I guess. And my agent and editor were like, you gave us so much thought. We're good. We're happy.
Oh, wonderful. That I didn't even think about that. That's sort of the fact that you taught me as the reader how to read pigeon. And so by the time I got to the end, I could understand. Oh, that's so smart. Oh, I like that. I heard you say that you stand on the shoulders of your ancestors in all that you do. Is that the right terminology? You stand on the shoulders. And I wondered about that and the sort of responsibility that we have to our families, that we have to our community, that we have to our ancestors, and how that fuels or inspires or influences your writing and what you want to say about Hawaii in this book and future writing. Is that something that's always with you? How do you work with that responsibility and how does it bring you forward in your storytelling?
Yeah, I think, I knew so little writing my first book. I didn't know what to be nervous about. And now that's a little bit different. And I think the first thing I have to do is tell a great story. And so at times I actually have to like kind of shut down the part of me that's anxious or worried. But I do take that responsibility really seriously. And I'm super close to my family, which is a lovely thing. But that also means like, my parents read This Is Paradise before it was published. I checked in with family about certain little things. And it's similar to the, projects I've had now where definitely there are check-ins with people who know more than me, who I think can help guide me when I need guidance. And, for like other writers, folks who support you, but will also be honest with you is one of the most important things you can have as a writer. So yeah, I think it's, it's like a process. You got to get like these ideas out first and then think of, well, what does it mean when I start to think about sharing that storyline, or I think about, putting the work in the world. And then that starts to be like a much more serious conversation with yourself and likely your community.
And now you're a teacher of writing. You have been for a while now. How does that experience being a teacher of writing to young students, to students in all different points in their career, how does that experience, how has it changed the way you write or your relationship to your craft? Or has it at all?
Yeah, I think the second you have to teach something, you understand it so much better. I remember thinking that when I taught composition and grammar for the first time, that, I had gone through graduate school, but I don't think I really understood a comma until I had to explain it to a room of 20-year-olds. And then I realized we all have a lot of feelings about commas, and
We do.
we all feel nervous about them, and maybe we should talk about that. So yeah, so I think I understand craft better. But the other thing is, I'm just amazed other people's minds and imaginations. Like my students just imagine things I could never have imagined. Like other humans' brains are amazing. And so I think I leave every day of teaching just thinking like, whoa, I just got, blown out of the water by a classroom of, again, 15, 22-year-olds. And I'm just impressed. And I just want their stories out in the world. And they're just kind of amazing.
Wonderful. I could talk to you two forever and ever, but I just looked at the clock and realized we're coming to the end of our time. But I have a couple more questions. So one thing our audience always likes to do is to get book recommendations from our guests. So obviously we want everyone to pick up This Is Paradise. And I know we included a link below to staff recommendations from Deshop's website. You have a bestseller section, and This Is Paradise is on that page. So I'd love to hear what you're reading now, what you're excited about reading, or even is there another Hawaiian author that you want our audience to be aware of to go check out? Who wants to go first? Kristiana, do you want to give us a recommendation?
Sure. Yes. I have a two, like right off the top of my head. No'ura Villa, her poetry collection, Ask the Brindled, which came out in the fall, is just totally stunning and gorgeous. She's another Kanaka Maoli writer. She also happens to be a performer. So if anyone's in Hawaii, catch a performance. And then the novel I've been teaching quite a bit recently is Joseph Hahn's Nuclear Family, which also takes place in Hawaii, which thinks about this long shadow and history and present of the Korean War, is thinking about indigenous land, is thinking about how land is divided. And it's also just like an amazing family story. So those are the two like top of my list right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll get the links and put them below. David, what about you? Anything hot in the store that you want to share or that you're excited about?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots. Those two writers and the two books that Kristiana just mentioned are definitely up there. I think with her mentioning those, I'll maybe go and do a little throwback to some folks that have been around for a while and are continuing to work. So selfishly, I'll have to promote Lee Tanauchi in this book called Chiburu, which we just published coincidentally, but it's an anthology of Hawaii Okinawan literature, and it's not your typical anthology. It's a collection of works from a handful of individuals, through plays, through blogs, through short story, through poetry, that really represent kind of what we've been talking a lot about, which is this sort of theme of identity and identity in a particular um, place or community, right? Where you're feeling one or the other, or maybe neither at times, and it's really great because I think it's a work that again casts a window into the more realistic parts of what Hawaii are like, and it really gets into the individual communities, and you can't help but see the complex influences that exist within each of those stories, from what you know being a part of Hawaii does to you when you have those familial connections. And then another great author who's got a handful of works out there is Lee Cataluna, and both of these individuals have done a great job of sort of moving between writing, uh, you know, works of literature, but also plays, and engaging audiences through that realm, and incorporating elements of pidgin, which really is sort of the local language of Hawaii. It is in of itself a language, and pidgin is so nuanced and varied that the pidgin spoken on Kauai could be very different than the pidgin spoken on Oahu, or the pidgin spoken in certain parts of one island is different than the other. And these are authors that have such a savvy way of being able to write in a connectedness that people unfamiliar with that can access stories and themes. So Lee Cataluna's most recent book is called Flowers of Hawaii and Other Plays, and it's a collection of shorts that have sort of been put into um, this publication.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love the recognition. So you would each say books and the other one would be like, yes, I know that one. Kristiana, what is next for you? I understand there's a middle grade book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
There's a middle grades novel. It is set on the island of Oahu. And it is about a girl who is in 6th grade and realizes for various reasons one day that she can hear what boys are thinking, and it is called Clairvoyance, and it should be out in 2024.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thanks.
I should also just share with the audience that you gave a wonderful talk at Radcliffe, and I know we put the link below, and it's absolutely worth your time to listen. And that talk is about another book that's in progress that we look forward to when it comes out into the world, whenever that is.
Thanks.
So definitely we'll put the link below.
Okay.
So David, our final question always goes to the bookseller. Can you finish, please, this question for us? Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
That must be the part of so many other things. Being involved in the business of books it's passion and it's a love, and it's a shared feeling that I have with my team and my staff and everyone that comes together. I mean, we as a bookstore, we wouldn't exist if it wasn't the people that are behind the scenes putting all of the work and effort into doing what it is that has allowed us to be in existence as a young bookstore now in its 5th year. And so I think it's really that passion. It's a passion for books. It's the passion for sharing that with other people and having the conversation. Running a bookstore is exactly what you can't get by going online, which is this. You can have conversation, of course, but there's nothing better than that human to human connection, interaction, to talk about a story, to trust the person that you're talking to recommend other things to you, open your eyes to new stories, new authors, new writers you didn't know about. And that's really, that's what it is, right? I think it really comes down to that, because like I mentioned before, I mean, you don't go into this business to make a ton of money. You go into it because of a love for something, and that's storytelling.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for being with us. Really appreciate your time and getting a chance to talk about your book, your bookstore, Hawaii. Not enough, of course. I feel like we all need a trip to Hawaii. Meet in the bookstore. Get a green tea from the place around the corner. I know I would love that. To our audience, if you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events. Or if you're not a Facebook person and you're watching this on another channel, hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our newsletter. It goes out once a week and gives you the rundown of all of our interviews. We'll be back in 2 weeks on Wednesday, April 26th, celebrating our 3rd anniversary show. And for that episode, we will be on another island, the island of Nantucket. I mean, much, much smaller than Hawaii, of course, which is multiple islands. Nantucket is just one. And we'll be welcoming author Julie Gerstenblatt, whose new book is Daughters of Nantucket. Please join us then for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. To Kristiana and David, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate getting to spend some time with you. And to everyone, be well and keep reading.